She laughed at the tiny human, until he took down her best warrior. Ryland steps onto the dusty platform, every muscle braced for violence under the alien sun's brutal glare. The crowd rings the Colosseum, roaring with anticipation as the massive gates opposite him rumble open. Veera emerges like a shadow given shape, tall and coldly majestic, her skin glimmering faintly with shifting hues that betray some subtle, alien form of excitement. Her gaze locks on him, pupils narrowing, and for an instant the air crackles with tension that feels almost tangible. Her lips curve, just barely, into a faint smile as if she's deciding whether to crush him or toy with him. "Kneel, human!" she commands, voice resonating with a low, thrumming power that seems to vibrate the very air around them. The words carry a dare beneath the arrogance, as though she's inviting him to defy her. Ryland holds his ground, letting the challenge hang for a beat, savoring the moment he always relishes before a fight. For a fraction of a second, he offers no answer. Then his lips twitch upward in a cold smirk. He says nothing yet, letting her imperious tones sink into the hush that ripples through the stands. Veera narrows her eyes, a flicker of annoyance dancing across her face. She's used to immediate compliance from lesser beings, and this tiny human does not seem cowed. He moves first, stepping forward and drawing the crowd's collective breath. The hush cracks, turning into a murmur of anticipation. He notes the subtle shift in Veera's posture, a slight pivot on her back foot, weight redistributed for balance. She's assessing him, testing his reaction speed. The wind carries the sharp tang of ozone from the energy rods overhead, swirling with the scent of sweat and blood from previous matches. Ryland's heartbeat is steady. He thrives on moments like this. The Watchers are expecting a swift demonstration of alien superiority, but he knows how it's going to end. A second later, Veera lunges, her open palm cutting the air with terrifying speed. Ryland twists aside, letting her blow graze the edge of his chest plate. Even the glancing contact numbs his right arm with raw impact. He counters with a downward strike at her wrist, forcing her arm away before she can unleash a follow-up. Their limbs become a blur of aggression, each block and parry colliding with a sound like a whip crack. Sand scrapes beneath Ryland's boots as he slides into a lower stance, foot hooking around Veera's ankle in a surprise trip. She staggers but recovers in an instant, baring her teeth at him in something that looks almost like delight. He lunges forward, driving a knee toward her midsection, but she twists her torso and hooks his leg aside with serpentine grace. They break apart, circling each other. In the stands, the crowd's cheers rise to a thunder. It's a spectacle, a towering alien woman with a terrifying aura, pitted against the human she belittles. Yet he refuses to be crushed. Ryland can sense the shift in her stance, that subtle shift in weight that tells him she's about to unleash something far more lethal than a test strike. Adrenaline pulses through his veins, matching the pulsing tension of the crowd. "You amuse me," she says, voice as cold as steel. "But you won't last." Her words are clipped, each syllable measured. There's a challenge in them, along with the faintest edge of grudging respect. Still, she doesn't believe a human can truly best her. Ryland responds with a slight tilt of his head, as though acknowledging the condescension. He launches forward, fists and feet a coordinated onslaught of punishing strikes. Veera meets him blow for blow, arms a flurry of defensive and offensive angles. Sparks of energy dance around them as the overhead rods react to the friction of their colliding force fields. A savage elbow from Veera cracks into Ryland's forearm. He grimaces but uses the impact to pivot, swinging behind her. Her braided hair whips across his jaw, stinging, and she attempts to elbow him again. He ducks, letting her momentum carry her forward. He sweeps a kick to the back of her knee, forcing it to buckle slightly. It's not enough to topple her, but she spins, frustration flaring in her eyes. Their gazes lock, and for a heartbeat they are suspended in the Colosseum's electric atmosphere. She smirks, a dangerous sort of amusement darkening her features. There's a ragged cheer from the stands. Then the distant shriek of horns. The gate on the opposite side of the Colosseum grinds open. Another warrior steps out, an even larger alien soldier from Veera's clan, clad in heavy plating and bristling with spiked gauntlets. The crowd shifts, uncertain. This fighter is massive, overshadowing even Vieira by a foot or more. People begin chanting his name, Kalvek. Ryland tenses, recognizing from the chatter that Kalvek is known as the clan's best warrior. The rumor is that no one, not even Vieira, has managed a decisive win against him. Vieira throws an irritated glance at Kalvek, as if his presence is an unwanted complication. The big alien's eyes lock on Rylan, and a cruel grin peels across his face. He steps onto the field, ignoring Vieira entirely. It's clear that whatever game Vieira and Rylan have been playing, Kalvek intends to end it by crushing the human. The crowd roars in approval. They want blood, and they want it now. Rylan scans the stands, noticing the heightened security, the tense posture of various armed guards. Something bigger might be going on behind the scenes. Kalvek roars, the sound a savage blast that rattles the nearest barrier. Rylan sees Vieira's knuckles tighten on the haft of a short staff she must have concealed. She looks at him as if to say, "You're about to die." But there's also a flicker of wariness in her expression. She might not care if this human gets crushed, but Kalvek's interference clearly offends her sense of order. Rylan sets his jaw, adrenaline pumping through every nerve. Let them both underestimate him. If there's one thing he's learned in a life of conflict, it's that nothing is certain, except his own refusal to be broken. Kalvek charges, the ground trembling beneath his stampeding steps. Rylan dives aside, rolling across the sand in a controlled tumble. The massive warrior's gauntlet slams into the Colosseum wall with an impact so powerful it cracks the stone. Rylan springs to his feet, breath quick, mind racing. Speed is his advantage. He darts around, forcing Kalvek to spin, tracking him with heavily muscled arms. One direct hit from that mountain of an alien would end Rylan on the spot. He has to exploit every opening. Vieira steps back, crossing her arms, observing with a faint smirk. She's curious to see how this tiny human will handle her clan's best. Rylan feints left, then shifts right, delivering a low sweep kick at Kalvek's legs. The giant stumbles but does not fall. Instead, Kalvek swings a backhanded blow that Rylan barely manages to duck. Sand explodes around them. Vieira's gaze flicks between the two fighters, and for the first time, her stance seems less assured. She is close enough that Rylan can catch her scent, a faint, spicy aroma that sets something in his chest vibrating with alertness. He ignores the sensation, refusing to acknowledge whatever primal reaction is trying to surface in him at this moment. Another near miss. Kalvek's spiked gauntlet whooshes past Rylan's face, missing by mere inches. A single spike clips Rylan's ear, sending a burst of pain that makes him grit his teeth. He twists away, slipping around Kalvek's flank, then leaps for an opening, driving a punch with all his weight toward the alien's rib region. The impact makes Kalvek grunt and reel. The crowd gasps, not expecting a human to do more than bruise himself on that thick hide. Kalvek's eyes narrow, disbelief warring with rage. In that heartbeat of stunned silence, Rylan's instincts scream to press the advantage. He jumps, hooking his arm around Kalvek's extended limb, using the alien's own weight to pivot himself upward. He slams a powerful elbow into Kalvek's neck, a vulnerable seam in the armor. Kalvek bellows in pain and fury, swinging wildly. Rylan drops to the sand, rolls, then comes up behind the giant. He snaps a fierce kick to the back of Kalvek's knee. The mountain buckles. With a fluid twist, Rylan wraps an arm around Kalvek's thick neck, grappling him in a chokehold. Kalvek thrashes, arms flailing, trying to dislodge this infuriating human that clings like a viper. A strangled roar tears from his throat. The crowd collectively rises to its feet, shock evident. Rylan plants his feet on the giant's back, using leverage and raw determination to tighten the hold. He can feel Kalvek's pounding pulse, hear each ragged breath. Sweat burns Rylan's eyes, but he doesn't loosen his grip. He's lived for moments like this, forging his reputation as a demon on the battlefield, a human who defeats foes who dwarf him. Kalvek's gargantuan arms reach up to peel Rylan away, but the angle is wrong and the warrior's strength is rapidly fading in the choke. One last spasm, and Kalvek collapses heavily to the sand. Rylan releases the choke, jumping back to avoid being pinned beneath the giant's body. Silence descends, broken only by the rasp of Kalvek's labored breathing. No one is quite sure what to do. Then the crowd explodes in a mixture of cheers and outraged cries. Some can't believe their best has fallen, albeit still alive, to the very human they dismissed as weak. Ryland stands, sweat-soaked, chest heaving. He looks at Vieira, meeting her gaze across the Colosseum floor. Her lips part, but no sound emerges for a moment. Shock flickers across her features, followed by a dangerous new respect. The air seems to thrum again with that electric tension. On some level, both of them realize this day marks a shift that can't be undone. The crowd roars. The entire planet might soon know the name of the human who took down their champion. She strides toward him, each step purposeful, and he wonders if she's going to try to finish what Kalvek started. His pulse spikes, but he schools his face into that same confident smirk that hides his exhaustion. The hush that falls is deafening when she stops an arm's length away. For a moment, they simply stare at each other. Sand and dust swirl around them in ghostly spirals, tinted orange by the setting sun. Then her voice cuts through the chaos. "Enjoy your triumph," she murmurs, low enough that only he can hear. "Because that wasn't my best warrior." He's about to retort when the Colosseum gates slam shut behind them, and the overhead rods flicker ominously. Weapons from the stands are raised. It's clear that some in the audience, perhaps loyalists to Kalvek or to the old guard, are furious. Ryland prepares for the possibility of another fight, shifting his stance. Vieira's eyes flick upward, then back to him. He can see the calculation in them. She speaks again, but this time, her tone is steel-edged urgency. "Move, human! Unless you want to die here." She doesn't wait for him to respond. She sprints toward the western exit, guards already storming in. Ryland clenches his jaw, not entirely certain why she's making a path for him, but knowing he can't stay out in the open. He bolts after her, each stride fueling the rising tension in his chest. The stands erupt into chaos behind them. Blaster fire crackles overhead. A new wave of shouting surges as onlookers scramble to safety. Ryland wonders if he's run from one trap into another. But as Vieira leads him through a side corridor, the urgency in her voice leaves him no choice. He slides behind a pillar, pressing himself against the cold metal as a squad of armed enforcers rushes past. Vieira gestures for silence. Their eyes meet again, and there's an unspoken question there. "Why are you helping me?" The corner of her mouth twitches in faint irritation. She exhales, glancing at the unconscious Kalvek still lying in the sand beyond the corridor's open hatch. Disapproval flickers across her face, as though she dislikes seeing her clan's champion humiliated, yet she can't deny her fascination with the human's skill. Ryland, breathing heavily, tries to steady his racing heart. Sweat trickles down his temple, stinging his eye. Vieira speaks, voice low but resolute. "If you thought beating Kalvek was your biggest challenge, you're wrong. That fight just made you a target for everyone who thinks you've insulted our entire warrior race." She tilts her head, studying him. "And yet you still stand. Perhaps we have use for you." Ryland bristles, not liking the implication that he's a commodity. But he also knows he has no exit strategy. He can almost taste the tension in the air, an odd mixture of fear, adrenaline, and something he can't identify. He pushes off the pillar, shoulders squared. "And what if I don't care about being useful?" he murmurs, keeping his voice hushed. A tiny spark of challenge laces his tone. He wants to gauge her reaction, to see if this alien woman is as unshakable as she appears. Her expression doesn't shift. She leans in, close enough that he feels a strange warmth radiating from her body. "You should," she says. "Because the alternative is death, human." She flicks her gaze toward a side passage. "We have to move." Ryland nods once, tension thrumming in his veins, and follows her through the corridors. Neither quite trusts the other, and both refuse to show weakness. Yet, in the heart-pounding moments that follow, they find themselves standing back-to-back more than once, fending off squads of guards who want Ryland's head for his apparent insult to their champion. The synergy between them is undeniable, even if they refuse to speak of it. Within minutes, the corridor is a battleground of fallen bodies, scorch marks, and broken weapons. At one point, Vieira presses her palm against a hidden panel, opening a secure hatch leading into a private docking bay. She steps inside and beckons Ryland to follow. He hesitates, scanning the enclosed space lit by flickering overhead lamps. A small craft rests on a raised platform, the hull etched with alien glyphs. She crosses to it, every movement exuding that lethal grace. Ryland remains on alert, uncertain if this is another trap. Vieira notices his hesitation and snorts. "Decide fast, human. We don't have the luxury of your doubt." He steels himself, jaw tight, and steps onto the platform, adrenaline still coursing through him. In the distance, the thunder of approaching reinforcements echoes. Vieira powers up the vessel, the engine humming to life with a keening whir that resonates against the metal walls. She gestures impatiently for Ryland to strap in. He does so, eyeing the alien controls. She slides into the pilot's seat, pressing a series of glyphs that cause the docking bay doors to slide open with a groaning hiss. The night sky outside is streaked with neon lights from the city beyond. Without another word, she lifts off, guiding the craft out of the Colosseum's hidden exit just as lights within the corridors flare, revealing squads of armed guards racing onto the platform too late. They ascend into the open air. Ryland glances over at Vieira, who is completely focused on maneuvering them through the spires of the alien city. Only now does he notice the faint irregularity in her breathing. She's not unscathed by their harrowing escape. The tension in her jaw and the slight tremor in her lower lip betray the toll of the fight. Yet she keeps her spine straight, her eyes locked on their path, refusing to acknowledge any weakness. Outside, searchlights crisscross the dark sky, scanning for them. Vieira expertly dips and weaves, using narrow alleys and building shadows to avoid detection. "Why?" Ryland finally demands, voice tight. "Why help me after making it clear you see humans as beneath you?" She doesn't answer immediately, busy evading a patrol ship that nearly spots them. When it passes, she lets out a controlled breath. "Because you've given me reason to think we can use your skill," she murmurs. "And because you showed me something I didn't expect." She taps the controls to kill the exterior lighting on their craft, flying in near darkness. "My people respect power, and you demonstrated it by defeating Kalvek. That alone makes you valuable." She flicks him a glance, something unreadable in her gaze. "Don't mistake this for benevolence, human. You're still a nuisance I might discard when it suits me." Ryland regards her with narrowed eyes, uncertain. But he can sense an undercurrent to her words, some unspoken purpose behind them. Instead of pressing, he swallows his retort. The night sky swallows their craft as Vieira descends into a maze of abandoned industrial structures. Steam vents hiss, neon signs flicker overhead. She lands in a shadowy spot beneath a rusted overhang. The craft's engine winds down. Darkness envelopes them, pierced by only a few guttering lights. Ryland unstraps, stepping onto the flight deck's metal surface. He is acutely aware of Vieira behind him, the subtle shift in air as she follows. Her presence is potent, a gravitational pull he can't fully explain. They're in the middle of some off-limits sector, judging by the disrepair and the distant hum of security drones. A sense of imminent danger hangs in the air, yet Vieira moves confidently through the gloom. Ryland shadows her, scanning every angle, keyed up for a new assault. At any moment, someone could drop from the rafters or round a corner, weapons raised. But there's only silence and the soft drip of condensation from overhead pipes. They reach a locked door set in a grimy wall. Vieira waves a hand over a panel, and it slides open with a metallic grind. Inside, a cramped chamber lit by a single overhead strip reveals what looks like a hideout. Tables piled with data cubes, a few stacked crates, and a rudimentary medical kit in one corner. Maps of alien star systems flicker on a battered hollow projector. 3 other figures sit or stand, bristling with tension at the sudden entrance. One, a lean alien with deep-set eyes, steps forward. He levels a plasma pistol at Ryland without hesitation. Vieira raises her hand calmly, and the lean alien lowers his weapon, albeit reluctantly. "This is the human I told you about," she says, scanning the room. The one who overcame Kalvek. That pronouncement sends a ripple of shock through the assembled group. Ryland notices their eyes flick to his arms, his stance, as if trying to see what manner of demon he might be to best Kalvek in combat. He offers no explanation. Instead, he crosses his arms and looks back at Vieira. You told them about me? He asks quietly, suspicion lacing his tone. She meets his gaze, a faint challenge in her own. I told them to watch the Colosseum. I wanted them to see for themselves. She turns to the group. Now you've seen that we may have an advantage we didn't expect. The lean alien steps forward again, eyes narrowed. We don't trust outsiders, he rasps. Especially not humans. And definitely not ones who humiliate our best warrior in front of half the city. His tone seethes with hostility, though there's a hint of fear there too. Ryland catches it, storing it away. Fear can be used, if necessary. He smirks, letting the silence work on them. Finally, Vieira breaks it. Enough, she snaps. If you have a plan to unseat the council and shift power back to the original warrior line, we need every edge. Kalvek's supporters will want retribution. We strike them before they rally. Her gaze slides to Ryland. He wants to survive, so he'll help us. Or he'll die in the crossfire. Ryland stiffens. It's less an invitation and more a thinly veiled threat. But the logic is undeniable. If everyone in this city wants him dead for beating Kalvek, he might as well side with whoever can keep him alive. He squares his shoulders, stepping closer to Vieira, ignoring the others. And what's in this for me? His voice is a low growl. She arches a brow, her skin shifting in temperature, an almost imperceptible pattern of color. You keep breathing. You might even find the revenge you're seeking, if your vendetta is tied to the Council's dominion. It's no secret humans have suffered under certain policies. Her words hang in the stale air. Ryland keeps his face unreadable, though her guess is dead on. The Council's enforced slavery on captured human colonies is personal for him. The lean alien snorts, still glaring. We don't need him if he's not committed. Vieira spins on him, eyes flashing with sudden fury. It's not your place to decide. Her voice resonates again with that layered timbre that leaves no room for argument. The lean alien stiffens but doesn't press further. A tall, silent female alien in the corner studies Ryland with undisguised curiosity, maybe sensing some hidden depth. Then she nods once, as if acknowledging him. Ryland notes it but says nothing. Minutes later, they're all gathered around the flickering hollow projector, studying the city layout. They trace routes leading to the Council's headquarters, discussing how to infiltrate or take advantage of certain weak points. Ryland stands slightly apart, absorbing the details. He can feel Vieira's gaze flicking toward him now and then. Something in the heat of her presence stirs the air, making him uncomfortable, though he refuses to show it. The Council's enforcers guard every approach. The lean alien grumbles, tapping a route that leads through a labyrinth of tunnels. We need a distraction. Vieira lifts her chin. We have one. Her gaze slides again to Ryland, that predatory amusement creeping into her expression. Our human's little display in the Colosseum has the entire city in an uproar. Word will spread that he defeated Kalvek. The Council will either try to spin it or execute him publicly. That means we can play it to our advantage. Ryland's jaw clenches. He realizes he's the bait in whatever plan they hatch. So you're going to march me out in front of them and hope they go for the kill? He growls, stepping closer. The others tense, but Vieira doesn't flinch. She tilts her head, a dangerous glint in her eye. Unless you have a better idea. The taut silence is deafening, and for a moment he's tempted to backhand her for the arrogance. But he sees the logic. He's already a marked man. If they can draw out the Council's top enforcers, it might create a window for the group to strike. He grinds his teeth, swallowing his pride. Fine, he mutters. But if I'm doing this, I'm not going in alone. She stares at him, the corners of her mouth curving in a way that suggests she's about to toy with him. You'll have me, she says simply. I won't let the Council's dogs steal your head before I get what I need from you. The unspoken subtext is that she's staking some claim on his life, and that sets his nerves on edge. Yet a twisted part of him finds the challenge invigorating. The lines are drawn, but they're forced to cooperate under threat of death. They finalize a plan that relies on speed, misdirection, and a violent assault on a key node in the city's security grid. The lean alien and the tall woman slip out first, heading to secure weapons and clear a path. Vieira gestures for Ryland to follow her deeper into the hideout, where a small arsenal is stored. Plasma rifles, blade-like implements that hum with energy, and heavier gear are laid out in crates. She picks up a modified staff, the same type she used in the Colosseum. He glances at it, recalling how quickly she moved with it. She holds it as though it's an extension of her arm, lethal and precise. "You've proven you can handle yourself," she murmurs, brushing her fingers along the staff's etched surface. "But are you ready to face all of them? Kalvek was just one warrior." Ryland picks up a compact plasma carbine, checking the charge. He shrugs. "I'll face however many come at me." He won't give her the satisfaction of hearing his doubts. She smirks, stepping closer. The closeness makes him aware of her height, the faint heat radiating from her skin, and that subtle shift of color that betrays her reaction to tension. "You're either insane or desperate," she says in that low thrumming tone. "I can respect that." Ryland tries not to notice how his pulse kicks up as she says it. He's not ready to acknowledge the strange pull between them. It might be fear or fascination. Either way, he won't let it compromise his focus. They move back into the main area, and within minutes they're stepping into the deserted streets with their cloaks pulled tight to hide their identities. Distant sirens echo, signifying continued unrest from the Colosseum incident. Searchlights roam overhead, scanning every alley. They traverse the winding roads in tense silence. Each step draws them deeper into the labyrinth. At one point, Vieira halts, flattening herself against the wall, motioning for Ryland to do the same. A patrol of enforcers passes by, their footsteps echoing on metal walkways. Ryland's breathing is quiet, controlled. He can sense the tension in Vieira's stance. She's ready to spring into action if they're discovered. But the patrol moves on, oblivious. Only when their footsteps fade does she exhale, turning to Ryland. "The entire city is on lockdown," she mutters. "The council wants you badly." He meets her gaze, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "Let them come." She shakes her head, face unreadable, and leads him onward. Though neither will admit it, there's a strange sense of anticipation coiling between them. Like two apex predators forced into an alliance, waiting for the moment one might devour the other. They round a corner, discovering the lean alien and the tall woman crouched behind a cluster of crates. They exchange curt nods. The tall woman motions to a flickering panel on the far side of the alley, explaining in hushed tones that it controls a segment of the city's defense grid. If they disable it, the council's watchers won't see the infiltration team approach. But it's heavily guarded. Ryland checks his carbine's charge. Vieira tightens her grip on her staff. The lean alien triggers a small device that scrambles the local sensors, giving them a precious few seconds to strike. Without waiting for a signal, they launch their attack. A surge of adrenaline hits Ryland like a jolt of electricity. He fires controlled bursts at the armed guards stationed by the panel. Vieira vaults overhead, staff spinning in a blur of lethal arcs, disabling two guards before they can even raise their weapons. The lean alien and tall woman flank the squad, pinning them in a crossfire. The entire skirmish lasts mere seconds, ending with the guards sprawled on the ground, unconscious or dead. Smoke hangs in the air, tinged with that metallic odor of burnt circuits. They waste no time. The tall woman sets to work on the panel, slicing wires and inputting override codes. Ryland wipes sweat from his brow, glancing at Vieira. She stands just a step away, chest rising and falling with exertion. Their eyes meet. For a split second, there's a flicker of something like mutual admiration. But it's gone almost instantly, replaced by the friction that sizzles whenever they lock gazes. The tall woman signals success. The panel flickers one last time before going dark. The path to the council's stronghold is now partially exposed, though they still have to navigate multiple checkpoints. The lean alien gestures for them to move, taking the lead with a grim expression. They weave deeper into the restricted zone, every moment fraught with the possibility of ambush. Over the next hour, they dispatch 2 more patrols and narrowly avoid a drone sweep. Rylan notes that despite the hostility earlier, the lean alien is at least fighting with efficiency and not trying to sabotage him. Still, the tension never fully dissipates. They know one misstep could bring the entire council's might down upon them. All the while, Rylan feels Veyera's presence like a second pulse. He tells himself it's just battle awareness, but a nagging part of him wonders if the heightened adrenaline is magnifying every glance, every brush of proximity. Eventually, they find themselves in a disused maintenance tunnel leading straight toward the council's center of power. It's dark, the walls dripping with condensation, the air stale and thick with the scent of damp metal. The group halts, listening for guard rotations. In the cramped space, Rylan becomes acutely aware of Veyera standing close behind him, her breathing steady but shallow. The darkness envelopes them, forcing them to rely on faint overhead lights spaced at wide intervals. The quiet closeness is oppressive, stirring uneasy awareness in Rylan's gut. He doesn't want to acknowledge it, but he can't deny the subtle charge in the air. Veyera inches forward, her arm brushing against his. A jolt of sensation spikes through him, unexpected and unwelcome. He tenses but says nothing, focusing on the mission. Her skin is slightly warmer than his, a detail he tries to ignore. Ahead, the lean alien motions them onward. They resume their slow creep, boots echoing softly. After an interminable few minutes, they reach a sealed door. Above it, an alien glyph identifies it as a restricted entry point. The tall woman kneels, deftly attaching a hacking device. Rylan stands guard with Veyera, weapon ready. Her staff is coiled in her hands, her stance tight with anticipation. They share a brief, sidelong glance, a silent acknowledgement that if things go wrong, they're fighting side by side again. The moment the door slides open, the group surges through. Instead of meeting an immediate squad of guards, they find themselves in a surprisingly empty corridor lit by sterile white lights. Doors line both sides, each one locked with advanced security. The tall woman consults a handheld scanner, pointing to the third door on the left. That's presumably an armory or control station critical to the plan. They approach, footsteps muted on the polished floor. Just as they reach the door, an alarm shrills. Red lights strobe from panels on the ceiling. The door slams shut behind them, sealing them in. Instantly, automated turrets descend from hidden compartments, locking on to the intruders. Laser sights flicker across the corridor. Rylan curses under his breath, raising his carbine. Veyera's lips peel back in a snarl, staff whirling to deflect the first hail of energy bolts. The lean alien and tall woman dive for cover behind a console. Rylan and Veyera stay in the open, forced to move constantly to avoid being pinned down. Adrenaline spikes. Rylan fires a rapid series of shots at the nearest turret, melting the barrel. A second turret swings toward him. Veyera leaps, staff spinning in a shimmering arc that slices through the turret's mount. Sparks shower them, and the turret drops. More alarms. The corridor's walls begin to seal, as if the entire structure is shifting into lockdown mode. The lean alien hisses, slamming a palm into the console to override the security. The tall woman throws a small explosive device, which lodges in the base of another turret and detonates. Within seconds, all that remains is a smoking ruin of half-melted machinery. The group hurries forward, finding the door to the armory sealed tight. "Open it!" Veyera snaps at the tall woman. She works feverishly at the console. Meanwhile, Rylan and the lean alien keep watch, expecting reinforcements any second. Rylan's breathing is ragged, sweat streaming down his face. He risks a glance at Veyera. Her posture is rigid, her gaze flicking toward him. It's a look that says, "Don't fail me now." He answers with a grim nod, swallowing hard. He can't quite ignore the pounding in his chest, the awareness of her nearness. He has no time to question it further. The door slides open with a hiss, revealing racks of advanced weaponry. They hurry inside. The tall woman immediately begins collecting charges to set along the corridor, preparing for sabotage that will cripple the Council's immediate response. Ryland spots a sealed container with the same alien glyph that was on Veyara's staff. Curiosity flares, but he refocuses on scanning for threats. The lean alien rushes to the far side, hooking data cables into a central system. We download the Council's security protocols, feed them false data, then blow this place, he mutters. Veyara stands guard at the door, staff gripped in both hands. She glances back at Ryland, nodding for him to help watch the corridor. Out in the hallway, lights flash red. Heavy footsteps approach, accompanied by static-laced shouts. The Council's enforcers have arrived at last. Ryland grips his carbine, stepping into the corridor with Veyara at his side. They exchange a look, each silently acknowledging the irony of standing shoulder to shoulder. Then the enforcers appear, a squad of heavily armored aliens with a roiling hatred for the man who bested their champion. One of them snarls, "Seize the human!" They level their rifles. In the next instant, Veyara spins forward, staff blazing with arcs of disruptive energy. Ryland dives to the side, unleashing precision bursts that take out two enforcers in quick succession. Blaster fire illuminates the corridor in rapid pulses. The thunderous clash of staff on armor echoes. Veyara hurls one enforcer aside, her staff hooking beneath his guard to slam him into the wall. Ryland sidesteps a volley of shots, returning fire with controlled bursts that punch through the enforcer's ranks. Shouts, sparks, and the acrid smell of burned plating fill the air. The lean alien yells from inside the armory. "Almost done!" Ryland grits his teeth, dropping another enforcer with a well-placed shot to the knee and then to the chest. Veyara tears through the remaining two with a display of fluid brutality that leaves Ryland momentarily in awe. The corridor lies still, thick with the stench of ozone. Veyara's chest heaves as she stands amid the fallen. Their eyes meet in the flicker of red alarm lights. There's a raw electricity in that gaze, fueled by the kill-or-be-killed intensity of combat. Without conscious thought, Ryland feels a surge of primal awareness. She is lethal grace, and in this moment, that dark magnetism coils around them both. He forces himself to pull away from that unfamiliar spark, turning to see if more enforcers approach. It's not over yet. Back in the armory, the tall woman finishes rigging explosives. The lean alien unplugs the data cables, a triumphant grin on his face. "We've got what we need. Time to go." The group rushes out, careful to avoid the carnage in the corridor. Veyara leads them down a secondary passage, presumably an exit route. Just as they reach another sealed door, the overhead speakers crackle to life. A cold, authoritative voice booms. "Veyara, you dare betray the Council for the sake of that human? Your lives are forfeit. Surrender now, and we may let the others live." Veyara's jaw tightens. Her hands grip her staff until her knuckles pale. Ryland's gaze slides toward her. Betray the Council, so she's a higher-ranking figure than she let on. She ignores the voice, motioning for the tall woman to blow the charges. The corridor behind them erupts in a series of thunderous blasts that rattle the complex. The lights flicker, and the group steps through the exit, scanning for more opposition. A handful of enforcers lie stunned or bleeding in the wake of the explosion. They push through, seizing the moment of chaos. Outside, they emerge onto a high balcony overlooking the city's central sector. Alarms ring out, and the distant glimmer of security drones crowds the sky. The lean alien curses. "We won't get far. We need to split up." Veyara shakes her head. "No. We hold position. Let them come, and we pick them off while the sabotage unfolds." Ryland's pulse hammers. This is suicidal, but maybe it's their only shot. The tall woman sets up a shield generator that creates a flickering barrier at the balcony's edge. Veyara steps to Ryland's side, eyes scanning the sky. "Don't get yourself killed, human," she breathes. "At least not until we finish this." Her voice carries that same molten undercurrent that has been igniting his nerves all night. He huffs out a breath, half a grim laugh. "I wasn't planning on dying today." A faint, razor-edged smile twitches her lips. Then the swarm of drones descends, and chaos engulfs them once more. Plasma bolts rain down from above. The lean alien and tall woman fire upward, dropping 2 drones in quick succession. Vieira leaps onto the balcony's ledge, staff humming with raw power, deflecting shots that would have killed them all. Rylan targets the drones that flank them, each blast from his carbine punctuated by the hiss of melted alloy. The shield generator flickers and sparks, barely holding under the barrage. Smoke and fire fill the air, casting the city skyline in a hellish red glow. Finally, with a deft twist of her staff, Vieira hurls an energy wave that disrupts the remaining drones, sending them spinning into the darkness. One crashes into a distant tower, bursting in a plume of sparks. The other slams into the ledge, narrowly missing Rylan's head. He ducks, cursing. The lean alien and tall woman are already scanning for the next wave. The sirens below intensify. Reinforcements will be on them any second. Vieira's eyes sweep over the group. This way, she says, pointing to a precarious network of maintenance ladders. They rush along the balcony and begin descending, boots ringing on rungs. The city's underside is an industrial maze of pipes, catwalks, and neon backwash. Below, groups of enforcers race to intercept them. Rylan's arms burn from the intensity of the night's battles, but he forces himself onward. The vantage from the ladder reveals the scale of the chaos they've unleashed. Sections of the council's complex lie in flaming ruin, an entire quadrant of the security grid offline. The plan is working, but it's not over. They drop onto a narrow walkway 2 stories above street level. More enforcers appear, weapons drawn. Gunfire sparks around them, clanging off pipes and shattering neon signs. The team scatters for cover. Vieira and Rylan end up behind a half-collapsed railing. Their shoulders press together, though they pretend not to notice. The tall woman and the lean alien take flanking positions. A vicious firefight ensues, lights strobing through the gloom. Rylan fires at a cluster of enforcers pinning the tall woman behind a vent. Vieira hurls a short-range energy blast from her staff that sends 3 enforcers flying off the platform. Within minutes, they neutralize the threat, but more sirens echo from distant streets. The lean alien signals that they have to keep moving or risk being overrun. Despite the danger, Vieira lingers for a second, scanning Rylan's face. "You're bleeding," she says, though her tone betrays more observation than concern. He touches his temple, feeling the warm slick of blood. A stray shot must have grazed him. He forces a cocky grin. "Better me than you." Her expression remains unreadable, but she nods once, acknowledging his tenacity. They press on, adrenaline fueling each step. By the time they reach another safe house, a dilapidated storage compound hidden beneath layers of scrap, the group is exhausted, battered, and singed. The tall woman keys in a sequence to open a concealed door, and they file inside, sealing it behind them. The whine of search vehicles echoes overhead, but the group is momentarily safe. Neon strips illuminate a cramped space filled with makeshift bedding and crates of supplies. The lean alien slumps against the wall, panting, while the tall woman opens a med kit. Rylan drops onto a metal crate, shoulders aching, ears still ringing from the firefight. Vieira stands near him, staff resting in the crook of her arm, posture rigid. No one speaks for a long moment, each of them coming down from the lethal intensity. Finally, the tall woman approaches Rylan, offering a small vial of coagulant. "You're wound," she says quietly. He dabs some of the gel on the bleeding gash. The pain recedes to a dull throb. Vieira watches but says nothing, though her gaze flicks to the blood. Rylan can't read the emotion there. Gratitude? Disgust? It's hard to tell. He focuses on breathing, controlling the tremor in his limbs. The lean alien scrubs a hand over his face, exhaustion deepening the lines around his eyes. "We dealt a blow to the council tonight," he mutters. "But they'll come back stronger. We need time." Vieira folds her arms. "Time and more allies. There are factions that resent the council's stranglehold on power." She glances at Rylan again, that faint, mysterious heat in her stare. "And we have an unlikely symbol of defiance right here." Rylan exhales, mind spinning. He never planned on becoming a symbol. He had his own reasons for confronting the alien champion, reasons that revolve around the oppression of his people. Now he finds himself at the center of a rebellion he barely understands, allied with an alien woman who sees him as both tool and curiosity. Despite the swirl of confusion, he can't deny the primal rush he felt fighting at her side. The memory of their synchronized movements lingers, spiked by the fleeting awareness of her touch, her presence. They settle into grim rest. The tall woman stands guard at the entrance, while the lean alien rummages through a crate for rations. Rylan rests his head against the wall, trying to push away the growing ache in his chest. Across from him, Vieira paces slowly, eyes never leaving him for long. Neither speaks. Their eyes meet occasionally, but they keep their distance. A corner of Ryland's mind acknowledges that if not for the swirl of combat and the impossibility of this alliance, he might find her dangerously alluring. But he locks down that thought, telling himself it's just battle tension playing tricks. Eventually, the lean alien hands out ration bars. They eat in silence, too keyed up to relax fully but too tired to keep moving. Ryland bites into the bland bar, forcing himself to swallow. Every muscle in his body screams, but he refuses to show weakness. Vieira strips off one piece of her armor to inspect a deep bruise on her forearm, black and blue against her luminous skin. She hisses softly, then looks up to see Ryland watching. Her expression hardens, daring him to comment. He looks away. A few heartbeats later, the tall woman returns from her post. The patrols have moved on, she says softly. We'll need to relocate soon, but for now we have a window to plan our next move. She addresses Vieira and the lean alien. They begin discussing the council's strongholds, while Ryland tunes out, letting his eyes flick shut for a moment. The last hour has been a whirlwind of violence and forced cooperation. Through the haze, he keeps replaying the moment he had Kalvek in a chokehold, the roar of the crowd, and Vieira's reaction. She'd laughed at him at first, mocked him. Now she's risking her life beside him. It's almost too much to process. At some point, Ryland drifts in and out of an uneasy doze, only half aware of the conversation around him. Something stirs him. He opens his eyes to find Vieira standing over him, an inscrutable expression on her face. He tenses, uncertain if she means to fight or speak. She simply studies him for several long seconds. He realizes that their entire dynamic so far has been forged in a crucible of conflict. They've exchanged words only under the pressure of survival or challenge. He waits for her to speak, but she doesn't. Instead, she lifts her chin slightly, as if telling him to rest. Then she steps away, returning to the others. He exhales slowly, a tension coiling and uncoiling in his gut. It's not fear. No, it's something else, something that unsettles him more than fear. The awareness of her presence, the sense that they're caught in a gravitational pull neither can fully control. But he's not ready to confront it. Not yet. So he allows the darkness of exhaustion to swallow him for a brief respite, uncertain what new chaos the next day will bring. When he finally does slip into a shallow sleep, it's with the image of Vieira's narrowed eyes burned into his mind. And he knows, on some unspoken level, that their fates have become as entangled as their weapons in combat. Whether they survive or die together remains to be seen, but there's no going back to what they were before that fateful fight in the Colosseum. They wake to the distant hum of engine thrusters overhead. The lean alien is already checking a battered communication device, cursing under his breath. The tall woman eyes Ryland warily, but at least the open hostility is gone. Vieira stands at the exit, her posture tense, scanning the murky morning light trickling through a gap in the ceiling. We'll move now, she announces, before the council's search patterns tighten. Ryland pushes himself to his feet, ignoring the ache in his muscles. He meets Vieira's gaze, and in her eyes he reads a promise of more challenges to come. Another day of violence, subterfuge, and tenuous trust. He can't deny the flicker of excitement that rises unbidden in his chest. If she senses it, she doesn't betray the fact. She only turns, gestures for them to follow, and steps out into the broken labyrinth of the city, leading them toward the next battle in a war that has only just begun. They have no time for courtesies or kindness. Every exchanged glance is a clash of wills, every discussion a subtle test of boundaries. Yet Ryland can't ignore the sheer pull that crackles in the air whenever he's near Vieira. She, in turn, treats him like a potential weapon, a piece on a board that only she knows how to play. And despite himself, he suspects that if he survives this ordeal, it will be tied to her fate as well. They move quickly through the twisting streets, keeping to shadows and deserted alleys. The city above them bustles with uneasy tension, lights flickering in the haze of dawn. Patrol ships crisscross the skies, searching for the rebels who've dared strike at the council. Every so often, sirens wail in the distance. The group stops at an abandoned structure, slipping inside to consult a battered holomap. Vieira and the lean alien crouch over it, pointing to various sectors. The tall woman stands watch, scanning the street. Ryland leans against a cracked wall, arms folded. His gaze drifts to Vieira as she discusses infiltration routes. She notices him looking and lifts a brow in challenge. He stares back, unflinching, until she returns her attention to the map. In that small exchange, a silent tension flares. He wonders if she too feels that sudden spark whenever their eyes lock. Maybe she's just evaluating him, deciding how best to use him. Either way, he won't give her the satisfaction of flinching first. They settle on a plan to sabotage key supply lines. The Council depends on shipments of specialized crystals for their advanced weaponry and energy systems. If those shipments are disrupted, the Council's hold on the city will weaken. The rebels, however few they are, might gain leverage. Vieira leads the discussion, and it becomes clear she has intimate knowledge of the Council's logistics. Ryland files that away. Her role must have been significant before she turned traitor to them. Within an hour, they're on the move again. They navigate rusted catwalks, slip through sewage tunnels that reek of chemicals, and bypass automated drones. At one point, a security checkpoint nearly catches them. The tall woman quickly hacks a control node, causing the checkpoint's scanners to go offline. They hurry through, hearts pounding. Once clear, they find themselves at the outskirts of a massive industrial complex where the crystals are refined and shipped. Smoke-belching towers loom overhead. Cranes swing in slow arcs, moving containers from one platform to another. Armed enforcers patrol the perimeter in squads of 4. They spend the next hour watching from a distance, studying guard routes, noting weak points. Ryland crouches beside Vieira, close enough that he can feel the subtle heat of her skin. Neither acknowledges the proximity. Instead, they track the movement of a large cargo skiff leaving the facility. If they can't shut down the entire operation, maybe they can sabotage just one shipment and make a statement. Finally, Vieira glances at Ryland, nodding once. It's time. She splits the group into pairs. The lean alien and tall woman will create a diversion on the far side of the complex, drawing off guards and possibly disabling security nodes. Meanwhile, Vieira and Ryland will infiltrate from the east side, planting explosives in the main warehouse. Ryland can't suppress a slight pang of apprehension, though he masks it. Working alone with Vieira means walking a knife's edge between alliance and conflict. But maybe that's what keeps his senses razor sharp. They wait for the signal. Moments later, muffled explosions rock the opposite end of the facility. Alarms blare, and enforcers scramble toward the disturbance. Vieira and Ryland slip through a side gate, hugging the shadows. Her staff hums with subdued energy, while Ryland cradles his carbine. They head for the largest warehouse, weaving past crates and flickering lights. The structure itself is a towering behemoth, windows tinted a dull green, heavy doors sealed with biometric locks. Vieira halts, pressing herself against the wall. She scans the area, then motions for Ryland to place a small charge at the lock. He does so, the device blinking red. She pulls him away just as the charge silently disables the door, leaving it ajar. They slip inside, hearts hammering. The interior is massive, rows of stacked crates and mechanical arms designed to load them onto cargo transports. The crystals inside refract any light in shimmering patterns, giving the space an otherworldly glow. Ryland takes point, scanning the aisles. He hears distant shouting from outside, but the warehouse is oddly silent. Too silent. He glances at Veyara, who nods and slinks into the shadows of a towering row of crates. They need to plant charges at structural weak points, ensuring the entire place collapses when triggered. Rylan moves to the first support column, carefully setting the explosive with practiced hands. His mind replays every step of the sabotage routine he's learned over years of guerrilla warfare. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoes from somewhere in the warehouse. He spins, weapon raised. Veyara is crouched low, searching for the source. Another thud reverberates, closer this time. They exchange a tense look, adrenaline spiking. Something is in here with them. Carefully, they creep forward, weaving between crates. The shimmering crystals cast odd reflections on the walls, making it hard to pinpoint movement. Then a figure steps into view at the far end of the aisle. It's an enforcer in heavy armor, but not just any enforcer. The insignia on his chest marks him as a high-ranking officer. And he's not alone. 4 more enforcers fan out behind him, weapons raised. Veyara scowls. They must have anticipated a possible breach. Rylan curses silently. They're outnumbered and cornered among the crates. The lead officer raises his voice. Veyara, we know you're here. The council wants you alive, if possible. His gaze flicks across the warehouse. The human, though, we can incinerate. Veyara sets her jaw. Rylan sees the barely contained fury in her eyes. He gestures for her to keep to cover, but she tenses, energy crackling along her staff. The lead officer steps closer. You betrayed your own clan. Have you no sense of honor? Siding with a pathetic human who bested Kalvek by sheer luck? Rylan can't let that slide. Luck had nothing to do with it, he calls out, stepping from behind a crate to draw their attention. The enforcers pivot, weapons aiming at him. Heart pounding, he keeps his carbine level. He senses Veyara slipping around to flank them. One of the enforcers barks a laugh. We'll see how cocky you are when we peel your skin from your bones. Rylan opens fire, blasting the nearest enforcer backward into the crates. The rest scatter, returning fire. Bolts of plasma sizzle past Rylan, forcing him to dive behind a crate. The crystals inside it glow brighter, reacting to the energy discharge. Veyara pounces from the side, staff slashing at an enforcer's rifle. He staggers, tries to retaliate, but she's too fast. A brutal strike to his helmet knocks him out cold. The lead officer bellows, rallying the remaining enforcers. They pin Rylan down with suppressive fire. Shots slam into the crate, sending shards of crystal scattering. The intense glow almost blinds him, but he forces himself to return fire, picking off one more enforcer. Veyara tears through another, staff humming. The lead officer snarls and fires a high-intensity bolt that clips her shoulder, sending her sprawling. Rylan's pulse spikes as she hits the floor with a pained gasp. Without hesitation, Rylan vaults over the ruined crate, unleashing a volley of blasts at the officer to force him back. He slides to Veyara's side, eyeing her injury. A scorched wound smolders at the edge of her armor. She grits her teeth, fury dancing behind her eyes. I'm fine, she snaps, trying to stand. He grips her arm to steady her, noticing how her skin's temperature flares in response to the pain. The lead officer steps forward, raising his weapon for a killing shot. Rylan fires first, catching the officer in the chest. The armor absorbs most of the impact, but it's enough to knock him off balance. Veyara seizes the moment, thrusting her staff in a sweeping arc that smashes across the officer's helmet. He staggers, dropping to one knee. She hisses through clenched teeth, ignoring her wound, and raises the staff for a finishing blow. The officer spits blood, a final bitter snarl twisting his lips. But another enforcer emerges from behind a row of crates, weapon aimed straight at Veyara's back. Rylan, instincts screaming, lunges, shoving her aside. The enforcer's shot slams into Rylan's left side, searing pain ripping through him. Gasping, he twists around and returns fire, killing the enforcer. Smoke rises from the wound in his torso. He clenches his teeth, vision swimming. Veyara finishes the officer with a savage strike, then whirls, eyes widening at Rylan's injury. He stumbles, nearly dropping his carbine. She catches him, her grip firm on his arm. Her breathing is ragged, and for a moment, her gaze flickers with something akin to alarm. He can feel the heat of her body, sense the rapid thrum of her pulse. The tension that's always simmered between them flares in a different way now, fueled by urgency and pain. She presses a hand to his wound, trying to staunch the bleeding, ignoring her own injury. "Don't be a fool," she mutters, her voice hoarse with adrenaline. "You should have let me handle it." He tries to grin but manages only a grimace. "Couldn't let you steal all the glory." Despite the tension, there's a spark in her eyes that mirrors his own ferocity. She helps him to his feet. The warehouse is littered with bodies, crates still glowing with the remnants of scattered crystal shards. Alarms continue to wail in the distance, no doubt signaling reinforcements. Vieira steadies him against a support column, rummaging for the med kit strapped to her belt. She applies a sealant to the smoldering wound on his side, her touch surprisingly gentle despite the adrenaline coursing through both of them. Ryland grunts, sweat pouring down his brow. Their faces are inches apart, the heat of combat still coursing through their veins. He can feel her breath on his cheek, ragged and laced with suppressed pain. Neither speaks. The silence between them is deafening, loaded with everything they've fought against, and for. After a moment, Vieira helps him stand more steadily. "We still have a job to do," she says, nodding to the rest of the warehouse. They limp through the aisles, setting the remaining charges. Ryland can barely focus, each step sending jolts of agony through his body. Yet somehow, the presence of this fierce alien woman bolsters him. She remains close, helping him balance. In turn, he covers her as she plants charges on key structural supports. Their synergy, rough as it is, stands out starkly now that they're both wounded. Every glance is laced with tension, every brush of contact a reminder of how fragile their alliance is. When the last charge is in place, they trigger the timer. They have 2 minutes to escape. The exit beckons at the far end of the warehouse. Vieira supports Ryland's weight, practically dragging him through the door. Smoke from the earlier firefight hangs in the air, stinging their eyes. As they stumble outside, the pungent smell of industrial chemicals greets them. Sirens blare, lights flashing across the complex. Overhead, the distant roar of incoming craft signals the council's reinforcements. They race, as best they can, across the open ground, weaving between shipping containers. At the perimeter fence, they spot the lean alien and tall woman in a firefight with a squad of enforcers. No time to retreat quietly. They need to fight their way out. Vieira passes Ryland a fresh power cell for his carbine, and he snaps it into place, ignoring the shaking in his hands. Together they charge forward, plasma bolts streaking the air. The tall woman notices them and suppresses a gasp at their injuries. But Ryland and Vieira keep moving, unleashing a hail of fire that takes the enforcers by surprise. The resulting clash is brutal and quick. An explosion deep in the warehouse rattles the ground, marking the detonation of their charges. Flames burst through the roof, sending glowing shards of crystal shooting into the air. The entire complex begins to collapse, a chorus of screeching metal and collapsing supports. The lean alien hollers, "We have to get out of here, now!" Ryland nods, pressing a hand to his searing wound. They sprint for the gates, dodging falling debris and the last remnants of resistance. The shockwave of the imploding warehouse knocks them off their feet, scattering them in the dirt. A massive fireball blooms behind them, tinted in strange iridescent colors from the crystal reaction. Ryland coughs, dragging himself up. Vieira is already on her feet, eyes on the swirling inferno. The tall woman and the lean alien gather nearby. For a moment, they share a collective sense of triumph mixed with raw dread at the scale of destruction. Ryland's side throbs mercilessly. He doubles over, spitting curses. The tall woman rushes to his side, rummaging in the med kit for stronger painkillers. Vieira's face is cast in the surreal glow of the fires, her expression unreadable. A distant rumble shakes the ground, possibly a secondary explosion. She turns to the group. "We have to move before they close in." Her voice is strained, but unwavering. They hurry away from the blaze, slipping into a half-collapsed tunnel that leads toward a warren of old service corridors. The tall woman helps Rylan limp along, while Vayara and the lean alien scout ahead. Smoke chokes the air, and every breath tastes of ash. Somewhere above, the council's ships descend on the ruined complex, sirens echoing off metal walls. But by the time they reach the service corridors, the group is swallowed by darkness once more. When they're finally safe enough to stop, Rylan collapses against the wall, gasping. Vayara crouches beside him, her wounded shoulder dark with dried blood. She looks at him with fierce eyes. How bad? He manages a grin. I've had worse. She gives a short, mirthless laugh. You humans always pretend to be invincible. He shrugs, teeth gritted. It keeps us alive. A flicker of something crosses her features, sympathy maybe, but quickly replaced by that guarded arrogance. The tall woman applies a stronger coagulant injection to Rylan's side, stifling the bleeding. Vayara stands, scanning the passage. We can't stay here long. She gestures to the lean alien. Check the exit route. Make sure no patrols are on our tail. The lean alien nods and slips away. The tall woman offers Rylan water, which he gratefully accepts. Vayara keeps her back turned, though Rylan senses her attention on him, as if measuring his ability to continue. Amid the swirling tension and the throbbing pain, Rylan finds his mind returning to that moment in the warehouse when Vayara pressed her hand to his wound. The raw concern in her eyes, brief but unmistakable, lingers. Part of him wants to dismiss it as battlefield reflex, but another part wonders if she's finally seeing him as more than a disposable pawn or an amusement. He can't dwell on it too long, the mission isn't over. When the lean alien returns, he confirms the way is clear. They slip through the winding corridors, emerging into a damp courtyard behind a derelict building. It's a temporary refuge, well away from the main thoroughfares. Tensions remain high. The group gathers in a makeshift huddle, exchanging exhausted glances. Vayara announces the sabotage was successful, and the council's entire supply chain will be crippled for days, if not weeks. The tall woman nods, satisfied. The lean alien looks wary, as though anticipating immediate retaliation. Rylan just focuses on staying upright. Vayara finally addresses the obvious. We need to tend to wounds and regroup. The council won't rest until they find us, and you. She points at Rylan. Are still their prime target. Her tone is clipped, but not as harsh as before. Something has shifted between them in the heat of violence. Their relationship is no less fraught, but there's an undercurrent of mutual reliance now. Rylan nods. I'm not dying here. The tall woman suggests a hidden med station in a neglected sector of the city. It's risky, but it might be the only place they can properly treat their injuries without being tracked. They set off again, forming a defensive formation with Rylan in the center. Despite himself, Rylan notices Vayara glancing back at him frequently, ensuring he hasn't collapsed. He tells himself it's only because she needs him alive for their cause. But a whisper at the back of his mind wonders if there's more to it. Traversing the alleys, they keep low, avoiding searchlights. Every moment pulses with the knowledge that the council's enforcers could appear around any corner. Yet they press on, fueled by the high-stakes momentum of survival. The synergy between Rylan and Vayara manifests again whenever they sense danger. Both react swiftly, covering each other's blind spots with fluid efficiency. It's a dance of mutual dependence, neither acknowledging the unspoken trust forming. When they finally reach the med station, an abandoned clinic deep in the slums, they forcibly pry open the doors. Dust motes swirl in the dim interior, the smell of disinfectant long since faded. Broken equipment litters the floor. The tall woman activates a backup power source, bringing a few overhead lights sputtering to life. Then she locates a functioning diagnostic bed, beckoning Rylan over. He reluctantly allows her to run a scan on his wound. The device crackles and displays swirling alien characters. Vayara hovers nearby, arms folded. The tall woman announces that while the burn is deep, it missed vital organs. Some advanced regenerative gel might help. Rylan grimaces. Do it. The procedure that follows is quick but excruciating, sending waves of pain through him as old skin and tissue are stripped away before new cells are prompted to grow. He clenches his jaw, refusing to cry out. Vieira observes, her face stony, but her eyes flick with something close to concern. When it's done, Ryland sits up, gasping, wiping sweat from his brow. Vieira extends a container of water. He accepts it, nodding in thanks but refusing to vocalize gratitude. The tall woman then insists on treating Vieira's wounded shoulder. Vieira tries to shrug it off, but the tall woman stands firm. Finally, Vieira relents, stripping the damaged armor from her arm to reveal an angry burn. She hisses softly when the med gel is applied. Ryland watches the procedure, noticing how she tenses, how her skin's shifting hues betray her pain despite the stoic expression. Time drags as they tend to each other, rotating through scans, bandages, and injections. The lean alien stands guard near the door, constantly checking a handheld sensor for movement. Outside, the city hums with tension. Radio chatter occasionally crackles from a battered comm device, referencing heightened patrols and a manhunt for the human insurgent. The entire time, Ryland and Vieira exchange minimal words. The tall woman and the lean alien discuss next steps in hushed tones. Finally, when the immediate medical needs are addressed, Ryland carefully shrugs his shirt back on. The tall woman stows the supplies in a small pack. The lean alien steps away from the door, his expression grim. We can't stay here. Patrols will eventually sweep this area. Vieira nods, rotating her newly bandaged shoulder. She turns to Ryland, eyes narrowed. Can you move? He nods, though pain tugs at every muscle. I can manage. Their gazes lock, an unspoken challenge. Don't slow us down. Don't tell me what to do. They slip back into the streets. The night has taken on a surreal quality, the sky a sickly red glow from fires still raging at the industrial complex. The air feels heavy, charged with dread. The group navigates the labyrinth of alleyways, guided by the tall woman's knowledge of the city's back routes. At one point, they pass through a corridor lined with flickering hollow advertisements. One projects the face of a council official, spouting propaganda about the human menace that threatens their society. Ryland tenses at the blatant smear. Vieira's lip curls in disdain, but she keeps walking. Eventually, they find a deserted building that seems structurally sound enough to provide temporary shelter. The lean alien checks for traps, then signals it's clear. Inside, it's dark and musty, but at least it's defensible. They barricade the doors with whatever debris they can find. The tall woman sets up a small device that scrambles scanning signals, preventing drones from detecting them easily. Finally, they settle in. No one relaxes, but at least they're not running for a moment. In the center of the room, a single portable lamp throws stark shadows on the walls. The lean alien fiddles with a handheld terminal, likely analyzing data stolen from the council's systems. The tall woman checks the perimeter. Vieira stands near Ryland, silent, arms crossed. He leans against the support column, every inch of him aching. Yet the tension in his chest when he senses her near is even stronger. They've fought together, bled together, saved each other's lives. The old hostility remains, but something else simmers beneath it. How did you learn to fight like that? Vieira asks quietly, breaking the silence. Ryland glances at her, noticing how the lamp's light sharpens the angles of her face. Fighting is all I've ever known, he replies, voice raw. Humans in my colony either learned to fight or died. She watches him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight with a feline glint. And the vendetta that burns in your eyes? Her tone is calm, but he can sense the curiosity. He hesitates. Words don't come easily. The council took everything from us, he says finally, keeping it brief. He doesn't elaborate on the specifics, the labor camps, the mass graves, the personal losses. It's enough that she knows there's a reason for his rage. She nods, a fleeting expression of understanding crossing her face. So your fight is personal, she murmurs. Her voice is low, almost gentle, but still carries that resonant timbre. He shrugs, ignoring the pain. Isn't yours? She tenses, glancing away. Mine is complicated. He wants to press her, but the look in her eyes warns him off. Instead, he shifts his weight, letting the silence fill the void again. They remain close, the gap between them charged. The sounds of the lean alien typing away at the terminal and the tall woman moving about the perimeter fade into the background. "You fight like one of us," Vieira finally says, almost grudgingly. "Your technique is raw but effective. It's—" she pauses, searching for the right word. "Surprising." Ryland snorts softly. "You enjoy being surprised?" She levels him with a cool stare. "I enjoy skill. Underestimating an opponent leads to defeat." There's a note in her voice, a subtle admission that she underestimated him at the Colosseum. He takes a breath, ignoring the flicker of pride that surges through him. "And you," he counters, "fight like you've got something to prove." She narrows her eyes, but doesn't deny it. Instead, she steps closer, her presence enveloping him in that faint, spicy aroma he's come to associate with her. "Careful, human," she murmurs. "You might get burned if you dig too deep." Something in the way she says it makes his heart pound a little faster. He holds her gaze, refusing to back down. The tension is palpable. The faint glow of the lamp casts dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the bruise on her shoulder. She's tall enough that he has to tilt his chin slightly to meet her eyes. He feels every breath, every subtle shift of her body's heat. For a moment, the noise of the city outside fades away, leaving only this precarious intimacy in its place. It feels like another form of combat, a clash of wills laced with something almost electric. Before either can speak again, the lean alien clears his throat from across the room. "We have a situation," he says, voice grim. The moment snaps, and Vieira whips around to face him. Ryland exhales, forcing his pulse to steady. The tall woman steps into the lamplight, glancing between them curiously, but keeps her thoughts to herself. The lean alien gestures to the terminal. "The data suggests the Council is mobilizing on a larger scale. They're pulling in reinforcements from other sectors. Full lockdown. They may also be preparing to detonate critical infrastructure to blame the rebels and incite fear." Vieira scowls. "They'd destroy their own to maintain control?" The lean alien nods gravely. "They've done worse." Ryland steps forward, ignoring the lingering twinges of pain. "Then we hit them first. Hard, fast, and final." He glances at Vieira, expecting her to challenge him. Instead, she gives a short nod. "Agreed. We can't give them time to consolidate." A plan forms quickly. The group will strike at a central communication node within the Council's fortress. If they sever the Council's ability to coordinate, it might spark enough chaos for other dissatisfied factions to rise up. But it's a suicide mission on paper. The fortress is the most heavily guarded structure in the city. The tall woman points out infiltration routes that pass through underground passages. The lean alien highlights the fortress's likely weak points from the stolen data. Vieira and Ryland stand on opposite sides of the makeshift map, tension crackling between them. They allocate tasks. The lean alien and tall woman will cause a diversion in the fortress's lower levels, while Ryland and Vieira push toward the communication hub at the top. It's reminiscent of the sabotage run at the warehouse, but on a grand, far more dangerous scale. Ryland's gaze flicks to Vieira, who meets it with unflinching resolve. "We end this," she says quietly. He nods. "One way or another." They rest as best they can, gearing up for the final confrontation. Ryland adjusts his freshly bandaged wound, making sure he can move without tearing it open. Vieira secures her staff and a sidearm. The lean alien double-checks the explosives. The tall woman calibrates portable shields. All of them wear expressions of grim determination. In a few hours, they set out for the fortress under the cover of darkness, hearts pounding with the knowledge that failure means certain death. The journey there is a tense gauntlet of evading patrols, disabling sentry drones, and bypassing security gates. Each encounter frays their nerves a bit more. But at last they reach the outskirts of the fortress, a towering spire of metal and glass, ringed by high walls and watchtowers. Searchlights sweep the area, and the hum of advanced weaponry resonates through the night. This is the Council's power center, the very heart of everything Ryland hates. They slip into an underground service tunnel, the lean alien leading, checking the path for traps. As they move deeper, a sense of finality settles over them. Rylan glances at Vieira, who remains silent, her focus turned inward. She catches his look, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between them. No matter what else stands between them, they're united in the goal of toppling the council. They emerge in the fortress's lower level. Alarms will likely sound the moment they pop up. The tall woman and lean alien split off, ready to enact their diversion. Rylan and Vieira exchange a last, terse nod with them. Then they're alone, forging deeper into the fortress's labyrinth of corridors, heading for the high-security elevator that leads to the communication hub. An alarm blares almost immediately. Someone spotted them on camera. Vieira sprints ahead, staff raised, as a squad of guards rushes in. Rylan fires short bursts, each shot precise, dropping 2 guards. Vieira carves through the others with swift brutality. They push on, ignoring the strobing lights and echoing klaxons. The fortress interior is a maze, but Vieira moves with purpose, recalling a route she must have learned from her time on the inside. At last they reach the elevator, sealed behind reinforced doors. Rylan plants an explosive charge while Vieira covers him. Shouts echo in the corridor, accompanied by the stomp of approaching boots. The charge detonates, blowing the doors inward. They dive into the elevator car, each panting. Vieira slams a control panel, bypassing security. The elevator jolts upward. Rylan braces for an ambush at the top. Halfway up, the elevator grinds to a stop. The lights flicker, and an automated voice announces a system override. Vieira curses, prying open an access hatch in the ceiling. They climb out onto the roof of the elevator car, where a set of maintenance rungs leads further up the shaft. Clambering upward, they hear muffled gunfire below, more guards likely swarming the elevator. They move as fast as they can, adrenaline burning away the pain of their wounds. Eventually, they reach the top of the shaft, prying open a hatch that leads into a high-level corridor. The communications hub is around the corner, according to the map. With hearts pounding, they brace for a final stand. Sure enough, a contingent of elite enforcers stands guard at the hub's entrance, weapons at the ready. Rylan and Vieira exchange a fierce look. This is it. They explode into action. Rylan hurls a flash grenade that detonates in a blaze of white light, disorienting the enforcers. Vieira leaps into their midst, staff lashing out with lethal accuracy. Plasma bolts sizzle in the enclosed corridor, some grazing past them, scorching the walls. Rylan guns down 2 enforcers who recover from the flash quickly, ignoring the searing pain in his side. He can feel blood soaking through his bandages, but he pushes forward. Vieira's staff hums and crackles, unleashing pulses of energy that knock enforcers off their feet. She takes a glancing hit to her leg, stumbling, but refuses to fall. Rylan covers her, firing until his carbine's charge is depleted. With a frustrated snarl, he slings the weapon aside and draws a blade. The corridor becomes a brutal melee, each blow a desperate attempt to finish the other side first. Finally, panting and splattered with blood, they stand victorious over the bodies of the elite guard. The door to the communications hub stands ajar. A swirl of sparks arcs across the frame, evidence of stray shots. Inside, banks of consoles and monitors line the walls, displaying real-time feeds of the city. A massive central terminal glows ominously, data streaming across alien script. This is where the council coordinates everything. Vieira rushes to the terminal, ignoring her limp. Rylan follows, scanning for hidden threats. The room is empty aside from the hum of machinery. Vieira types rapid commands into the console, face set in grim determination. We disable their communications, then broadcast a message to the city. The council's power can be broken. She breathes hard, sweat dripping down her temples. Rylan stands guard, blade in hand, checking corners for more enforcers. Suddenly, a voice crackles through a speaker. Vieira. It's deep and resonant, laced with contempt. You've caused enough damage. Surrender, and I will grant you mercy. Rylan recognizes the voice. It's the council official who boomed across the fortress earlier, the one who threatened them with destruction. Vieira ignores him, continuing to override the system. The voice hardens. I see you stand with the human. A pity you've allowed yourself to be corrupted by lesser blood. Your clan will disown you for this. Rylan bristles, stepping forward. Vayara sets her jaw, pressing the final sequence. My clan doesn't define my choices anymore, she growls. The screens flicker, and an alarm buzzes. Rylan spots an incoming signature on one of the displays, a large group of enforcers converging on their location. He curses. We're almost out of time. Vayara stabs a final key, and the entire communication grid goes dark. Static replaces the city feeds. The overhead lights flicker wildly before going out. Only emergency lighting bathes them in a dim, red glow. Vayara exhales, turning to face Rylan. It's done. The city will see them fall. He nods, adrenaline pumping. She limps over to him, a conflicting swirl of emotions in her eyes. They'll be here any moment. We may not leave this place alive. Her voice is strained, but there's a note of acceptance, and something more. He grits his teeth, pain and exhaustion warring for control. Then we make them pay for every step they take. They stand there, faces inches apart, hearts thundering. The unstoppable momentum that's been driving them together, step by violent step, now pulses in the silence. It's as though all the conflict, all the hatred, has forged a razor-thin line they both stand upon. Neither speaks. Then, with a sudden, ferocious urgency, they close the distance, mouths crashing together in a raw collision of adrenaline and defiance. There's no gentleness, only the taste of blood and sweat, the press of armor against bruised flesh, the electric jolt of two warriors who can no longer deny the pull that's been building. Rylan grips Vayara's waist, and she tangles her fingers in his hair, the staff clattering to the floor. The kiss is as bruising as any blow, laced with the anger, fear, and undeniable hunger that simmered beneath every heated glance. They break apart, gasping. Her eyes flicker with a mixture of anger and desire. You're insufferable, she hisses, voice trembling with more than just pain. He smirks through a ragged breath. You started it. They'd laugh if the moment weren't so charged with the threat of imminent death. Outside the door, the sound of rushing footsteps grows louder. Reality crashes back in. Vayara retrieves her staff, and Rylan pulls out a small sidearm from his belt. They take positions on either side of the entrance, preparing for the final assault. A handful of enforcers burst through, firing blindly into the dark. Vayara and Rylan move in tandem, unleashing every ounce of skill and fury they possess. The corridor outside flickers with muzzle flashes. Enforcers fall, one after another, but more crowd in behind them. Rylan feels a burning heat graze his arm. Vayara cries out as a bolt scorches her leg. Yet they keep fighting, pressed back into the hub. A last explosion rocks the corridor, possibly the tall woman and lean alien setting off charges. It shakes the walls, sending the enforcers staggering. Vayara seizes the moment, driving her staff into the floor and channeling a surge of energy that ripples outward, knocking the final wave of enforcers off their feet. Rylan rushes forward, dispatching them with precise shots. Then the corridor falls silent but for the crackle of sparks and the rasp of labored breathing. They exchange a glance, battered and bloody but alive. Behind them, the hub's consoles spark and fizzle, the entire grid offline. Alarms fade into static. The fortress, once the symbol of unassailable power, feels hollow. Outside, distant booms suggest further sabotage from their allies. The council's hold is crumbling by the second. Rylan leans against a shattered console, clutching his wounded side. Vayara drags herself over to him, the burn on her leg making each step a struggle. She collapses to her knees beside him, their faces at eye level. The emergency lighting paints them in crimson, like two specters in the aftermath of a cataclysm. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she lifts a hand to his cheek, brushing away a streak of blood. You survived, she murmurs, voice thick with exhaustion and something else, a raw vulnerability she hasn't shown before. He covers her hand with his, tangling their fingers, ignoring how alien her skin feels, how unusual the shifting temperature. The moment expands, and in the silence, they acknowledge what's happened between them. It isn't gentle love, nor a soft confession. It's the fierce bond of two warriors who have fought side by side, nearly died together, and realize that beneath their contempt lies an undeniable attraction. They both know this may be the only calm they get before the next fight, the next wave of enemies. Yet in this heartbeat, as the fortress shudders and sirens wail, they allow themselves a fragile acceptance of what they've become to each other. She leans in, pressing her forehead to his. Neither says a word, because words would be too small to hold the weight of everything they feel. Outside, the city's chaos intensifies as the council's power structure implodes. But for one fleeting breath, they are simply Vieira and Rylan, battered hearts and bruised souls converging in the twilight of an empire they helped topple. Then the tall woman's voice crackles through a communicator. "We're at the South Tower. We've cleared a path, but it's closing fast. You need to move!" The urgency tears them from the moment. Vieira lurches upright with a wince, offering Rylan her arm. He grips it, hauling himself to his feet, pain flashing through every nerve. Together they limp from the ruined hub, stepping over the bodies of enforcers, sparks raining down from severed wires. In the corridor, they find battered walls and flickering lights. Smoke curls through the air. The fortress is on the brink of collapse, battered by internal sabotage and external rebellions now emboldened by the Council's communication blackout. With the tall woman guiding them via comm, Rylan and Vieira make their way through twisting passages. Occasionally, they encounter scattered resistance from desperate guards, but these are quickly dispatched. Morale has broken. The fortress is no longer an impenetrable fortress of tyranny. It's a crumbling tomb for the regime that once held the city in fear. They finally emerge onto a high balcony where the tall woman and the lean alien wait near a small hovercraft. Both appear wounded, their armor scorched, but they manage to wave. Blaster fire lights the sky in the distance. Without a word, Rylan and Vieira stumble aboard. The lean alien guns the engine, and the hovercraft lifts off, skimming the crumbling architecture of the fortress. Below them, entire sections of the building collapse in on themselves, flames licking at the windows. It's a scene of cataclysmic change, a testament to how far they've come in one relentless night. As they bank away, the fortress implodes, sending a pillar of smoke and fire into the sky. The calm crackles with voices across the city. Some rejoice, others panic, but one thing is clear: the Council's grip has been shattered. The seeds of rebellion have taken root, fertilized by the daring strike that destroyed their stronghold. Rylan can't say what the future holds, but for now, they've accomplished what seemed impossible. In the hovercraft's cramped interior, the tall woman tends to the lean alien's injuries. Rylan slumps against the wall, clutching his side. Vieira drops next to him, exhaustion pulling at her features. Their eyes meet, reflecting the fires below. No one speaks, not yet. The night's insanity washes over them in a wave of relief and bone-deep fatigue. Despite the pain, Rylan manages to turn his head toward Vieira, meeting her gaze. There, in the flickering light, he sees a matching exhaustion, a matching sense of having crossed the threshold. He reaches out tentatively, brushing his fingers against hers. She lets him, not pulling away. The air between them is thick with unspoken understanding. They've spilled blood for each other, fought side by side, and discovered a connection that defies logic. The chaos and violence haven't dimmed it; if anything, they've intensified it. She squeezes his hand once, a silent acknowledgement that they're in this together now, whatever the aftermath may bring. The hovercraft speeds toward a safer corner of the city, where the rebellion's remnants gather to regroup. By the time they land, dawn is breaking over the skyline, painting it in shades of pink and gold that almost disguise the destruction. Debris and smoke still mar the horizon, but people emerge cautiously into the streets. A new day is beginning, uncertain yet brimming with possibilities. The tall woman helps the lean alien disembark. Rylan and Vieira follow, leaning on each other for support. Exhausted rebels cheer weakly at their arrival, relief mingled with awe. Word spreads fast: the fortress has fallen, the Council's communications severed. It's over. Rylan feels numb as the crowd parts around them. He knows this is a victory, but the cost weighs heavily on his mind. Vieira stares out at the wrecked skyline, her face a complex tapestry of emotions. Some see her as a hero, others as a traitor. But she no longer seems to care about labels. They find a quiet spot near the remains of a broken statue, carved long ago in the image of some alien deity. Collapsing onto a bench, they both let out shaky breaths. The lean alien and tall woman vanish to rally the others, leaving them alone in the rising sun. For a long time, they say nothing, letting the new day's warmth slowly ease the chill of battle. Ryland closes his eyes, absorbing the reality that he's alive against all odds, that the council is toppled, and that he's seated beside the one person he never thought he could stand, an alien who once mocked him. She shifts, wincing at the pain in her leg. He opens his eyes to find her watching him, her expression raw and unguarded. "We did it," she says softly, the disbelief and fatigue mingling in her voice. He nods, not trusting himself to speak. His throat is tight, overwhelmed by everything that's happened. Her lips curve into the faintest of smiles, a glimmer of relief. Then, hesitantly, she reaches for his hand again, resting her palm against his. He turns his hand to clasp hers, ignoring the sting in his muscles. They stay like that, an unlikely pair of battle-worn fugitives who've just reshaped the power balance of an entire city. The question of what comes next looms. The rebels will need guidance, leadership, a plan for rebuilding. Warlords might rush in to fill the vacuum of power. But that's a problem for another hour, another day. In this quiet moment, beneath the dawning sun, their eyes meet. No scorn, no mocking. Only a mutual recognition of the bond forged in blood and fire. Ryland lifts a hand, brushing the back of his fingers gently over her cheek. She closes her eyes, exhaling shakily, then tilts her head to press her lips to his palm. It's not a grand declaration or a sweeping romance. It's a simple, powerful acceptance, a merging of battered souls who found an unexpected solace in each other. He leans in, drawing her closer. Their lips meet again, softer than before, but still laced with the remnants of that fierce desperation. This time, it's not about claiming dominance or staving off death. It's about acknowledging that they've saved each other, in more ways than one. When they part, the sun is fully up, casting light on a city forever changed. They rise slowly, leaning on each other for support. The rebellion will need them. There will be alliances to forge, enemies to chase away, and a broken world to mend. But they have already passed their greatest test, surviving the fires of conflict, and emerging hand in hand. Step by step, they walk away from the broken statue, the wreckage of the old regime behind them. In the distance, the tall woman and lean alien wave them over, expressions a rare mix of gratitude and hope. Vieira glances at Ryland, and for the first time, her smirk carries genuine warmth. "Tiny human," she murmurs, voice teasing yet filled with a quiet affection he never thought he'd hear from her. "You proved me wrong." He chuckles softly, shaking his head. "I'll never let you forget it." Despite the aches, the blood, and the scars that will remain, they share a moment of laughter. It feels like a promise, a future not dictated by war and scorn, but by the alliance they've forged with sweat and sacrifice. They reach the others, who begin discussing the next steps for stabilizing the city. Vieira and Ryland exchange a final look, each silently acknowledging that while their fight may not be over, they've found something deeper than victory in each other. The battered sun rises higher, bathing them in light, and in that moment there are no more doubts. Their bond, rooted in conflict and tempered by passion, stands as firmly as the new dawn that stretches across the sky. They won't be parted, not by politics or vengeance. Whatever the challenges ahead, they'll face them together. And as the city stirs awake to a new era, their journey ends here, on the edge of a future they can finally shape for themselves.